All right, so let's look at the solutions to the problems on type 1 and type 2 errors. Let's do letter A here. The first claim is that the proportion of people who write with their left hand is equal to 0.1. So the null hypothesis here is that the proportion is equal to 0.1. The alternate hypothesis is that the proportion is not equal to 0.1. All right. Part B, the type 1 error is always that we reject the null hypothesis. You can always start the type 1 error with we reject the null hypothesis when, and then it's when the null hypothesis is true. So when the proportion of the people that are left-handed is 10%, right? Part C, the type 2 error is always a matter of we fail to reject the null hypothesis when the proportion of the population or of the people that are left-handed is not 10%. All right, so that's number one. All right, so the second claim in this problem set is that the proportion of gamblers who consistently win in casinos is equal to 0.001. So D, we need the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the proportion is 0.001. The alternate hypothesis then would be that it is not 0.001. All right, so type 1 error is always we reject the null hypothesis when the proportion is 0.001. And F, the type 2, is going to be we fail to reject the null hypothesis when the proportion is not 0.001. Okay, so there we go. So let's look at the third claim. The third claim is that the proportion of female statistics students is greater than 0.5. So this one's a little bit different. The null hypothesis will be that the proportion is half. The alternate hypothesis this time is that the proportion is greater than half. The type 1 error is always we reject the null hypothesis when the proportion is 50% or 1/2 or 0.5. The alternate or the type 2 error would be that we fail to reject H null when the proportion is not 50%. All right, so that's the third one. And then the fourth claim is the proportion of husbands taller than their wives is less than 90%. So what is the null and alternative hypothesis? The null hypothesis is that the proportion will be 90%. The alternate hypothesis is that the proportion is smaller than 90%. Right? The type 1 error is we reject the null hypothesis when the proportion is 90%, and the type 2 error would be we fail to reject the null hypothesis when the proportion is not 90%. All right, so that's the whole problem set. We've got it. All right, and this is the last problem set of the unit. So there we go. It's the end of Unit 7.